In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost.
Good evening, and welcome to Ghost. It is the midnight hour. It is time. And this is our first edition for the year 2025. We have a special treat for all of our listeners. I was honored to be asked to be on another podcast, NSPS TV, Paranormal, and with its host, Terry. Tonight we'll be airing that episode for your enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, guys, welcome to the show. This is Terry with NSPS TV Paranormal Podcast. Tonight we're in the Lion's Den, and tonight we are in Indianapolis, Indiana. Very interesting name, because I didn't think there was Indianapolis in Indiana, but I guess there is, because this gentleman lives there. But tonight we got Spirit, Indiana. Man, I think it's been a month out since I reached out to these guys to have them come on the show. So I thank you for your patience for jumping on. I really do. Man, the podcast can get backlogged up for months at a time. I'm sensing that I need to take a break because I'm averaging 1, 2, maybe 4 podcasts a weekend. Non-stop, back to back to back to back to back to back. I guess a lot of people are curious to see what I have to say, and I guess a lot of people like what I have to say, and I guess people are just, or better yet, they just want to get their names out and get the recognition they deserve. So why not do it on the podcast show, right? You know what I'm saying? But tonight, man, we got Chief Lawson. Chief Lawson is the CEO, if I'm right.
Yes, sir.
Of Spirit, Indiana. Introduce yourself to the world, my friend.
Well, I'm Chief Lawson. I'm the founder of Spirit Paranormal Indiana. We are the oldest parapsychology group in Indiana. We are, for most part, located out of Indianapolis. And we've been doing this. The conception was in 99. We actually did our first case in 2000. And we've been around a bit. So, been doing this for quite some time. We also, we have a class we put on called Paranormal University Master Class. And we do offer that for people that want to come in. We've had people come in from other states for it. I am also one of the hosts of Ghost to Ghost, which is our podcast, and we're getting ready to go video very shortly. It airs on the 15th and 30th of every month. And we do a lot of community outreach as well.
Wow, it seems like you guys are pretty busy.
It can be, and when you've got as many members as we do, trying to get everybody together is like herding cats.
Yes, how many members you guys have?
Well, right now we have 7 members. Now we are in the process of taking on another member, and our process. Our application process and membership process is quite lengthy. It usually takes about 3 months. We're very choosy. I mean, we've had a lot of people in the past as members of Spirit. And I'll tell you, they've had to leave for one thing or another. I mean, it's very rare we've had to remove someone on a disciplinary nature, but we are very selective and we vet them very well. Part of our application process is very similar to that of a fire department or police department. There's several stages, and we have 2 members right now that are waiting oral interviews. They're in stage 3. We were looking at putting on 1, maybe 2 members. We never run with more than 10 members. We've had 7 for quite some time, but unfortunately, job constraints from our other members have become greater, and we really need, like you were talking about, needing a break. We need an extra person to come on, especially when it comes to reviewing evidence of cases and helping out with some of the filing and electronics of it all. It's really helpful to have an extra person. So when some of our people are starting to get a little stressed with a lot to do, so we average quite a few cases. Everybody always asks me what our caseload is, and that varies. We might get 8 cases in a month, but we may only investigate 1 of them or none of them. I mean, it depends. Sometimes we talk to people. Matter of fact, we've got 2 cases I'm getting ready to close. Both of them came in right after the first of the year. And, they didn't require an investigation. But still, it takes time. It takes people. And so we're looking at putting on 1. We've got 2 candidates. They're both good candidates. One gentleman transferred from not terribly far from you, out near Kansas. He was a member of a team in Kansas. His job transferred him here, so he's had a little prior experience. The other lady met me at several of my lectures. I give a lot of lectures around the state, and I sometimes a little out of the state, depends on how far. But we were giving a lecture, and she was in attendance, and she'd asked me about what it took to join, and I told her about the process and where to get it started at. And next thing I know, she was at the next 2 or 3 lectures, and she put an application in. So she's our other applicant. So we're going to be putting that 8th member on here shortly.
Okay. Well, I wish you guys nothing but success on that member.
Thank you.
For all you guys on the different platforms tonight, all you guys on Kick, Rumble, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, my personal Facebook page. Hey, welcome to the show. I appreciate all you guys' support. I appreciate you guys, all the comments that you bring for the guest. But with that being said, Chief,
Yes,
I don't know. I don't know if you looked over some of my podcasts. Some of the questions I have can be controversial. But I'm an open guy that's able to allow people to say what they say and say what they feel, and so there's not going to be no difference. If you feel like something is, if you feel like there is something that you need to disagree with me,
Sure.
disagree, brother. I love it.
You'll find that to be a problem. I'm pretty outspoken.
I love it. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, a bunch of variety of questions. We're going to jump from all over the spectrum here.
That'll be fine.
Now you just mentioned something that I just recently start talking about it.
Okay.
And you mentioned the word parapsychology. Now, and I think that's the best word that an investigative team could ever use for themselves.
Yes.
I don't think ghost busters or ghost hunters and and all these other things, and all these other names that they use. I mean, people are okay. They are okay for what they want to be. But if you're truly into this, you like the study, you like the knowledge, and I'm not even saying that you have to go to school to be a parapsychologist, because I don't even think there's many colleges that I know
There's
of.
very few that run parapsychology programs. Very few.
Yeah, I know the University of Texas does.
Yes.
But boo-hoo to those guys.
MIT has it. Penn State has it. There's a few that still have the program. UCLA's got canceled back in 1978, and that was taken out. And some colleges have experimented. Now, if you go to England, that's a totally different situation. There's quite a few colleges that offer that as part of their psychology program, but they don't not near as many here in the United States.
Now, why do you think people don't use that term as much?
Honestly, I think they don't know what it means. I mean, and we always tell people there's a difference between paranormal and parapsychology. Paranormal is a giant umbrella term. It basically covers anything from cryptozoology, ufology, numerology, any of the ologies you can find, you can lump in there. That's just a big umbrella term. To say I'm a
Mm-hmm.
paranormal investigator and we use that a lot. I mean, that's interchangeable. You see the guys on TV doing it. I was just at a Paracon and I had this conversation with Dave Schrader, and we were talking about, the fact that don't see very many people using that term, and you don't. The problem is they like the catch term. I'm a paranormal investigator, but
Mm-hmm.
really, if all they do is focus on ghost, and that's actually the proof of the afterlife, that's a small portion of parapsychology. Now, to say we are a parapsychology research team, we are, but we specialize in proof of life after death. We don't do ESP testing. We don't, not necessarily, although we have the deck of cards to do it and can, but we don't do those experiments in that realm. I think, though, if you are pursuing the search for proof of life after death, proof of ghost, you're going to run into kinesis. You're going to run into clairvoyance. You're going to run into all these different spectrums of paranormal or parapsychology, and you should be aware of it. But I think most people don't know any better. They see it all over, paranormal this, paranormal that, and they go with that. Paranormal investigator. The other term, and I heard you on one of your other podcasts that said something about the term of ghost hunters. That's a term that is kind of crash to most of us. We don't consider ourselves per se ghost hunters. I mean, we do investigations, and our methodology is debunking and experimentology combined. So and everybody, when we teach our class, we always talk about methodologies. There's so many different ones out there, but we specialize in strictly searching for the life after death. Now, if we get a call and we think there's something involved, such as Bigfoot, we give it to BFRO in our state. We know Mike, who runs that, and I call him up. I give Mike more stuff than he gives me, and if he's listening, I'd really like a few, feedbacks. But and the same thing with MUFON. If we catch a UFO sighting, what we think could be, we will get MUFON recommended to them and get them referred to them and let them handle it. We strictly deal with ghosts, and I mean, I'm not going to tell you I don't enjoy watching those shows, but that's what our team specializes in, and we're very specific with that. And I think our studies and our continuing education, we stay with that field. But I think, truthfully, the reason they don't use it is they really don't know what the true terminology is.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right, but it don't take much to pick up an iPhone or pick up a book or or a library, just punch it in and see what it's really about, But
Well, the bad thing is, honestly, Terry, a lot of people who want to do this, they watch TV, they watch some shows better than other shows, my opinion, and they decide they want to go investigating, and they get on Amazon or eBay. You can buy all the tools just about, or they actually go to Ghost Stop or the Ghost Store and pick up equipment, and they make up a name and head out of the garage. The problem with a lot of those folks are, and I don't condemn other teams, I want to point that out, I don't say bad things about them, and I try not to even say anything bad about Ghost Adventures. But anyway, all honesty, the problem is they really don't have a good education, and they don't read. And I'm not saying that you have to be a total expert to go out and do investigating, but you should know what to do, because that's going to help you. How to take EAVPs, the processes and things that eliminate contamination are very important. Your data will be certainly contaminated or bad if you don't know what you're doing. And we've actually had teams send some of their people through our course, our master course, to learn a little bit more about it. Matter of fact, we were talking about taking on members earlier. One of the last things we do, if they pass the oral exam, they're passed to the fourth stage and last stage of our process, then they have to undergo a orientation and boot camp training. It lasts 12 hours, and they get education all the way through on parapsychology, on equipment. They have to do that before they can go on their very first investigation. I know, without naming groups, there's several groups out there that go, hey, you want to be an investigator? Come on out, meet us at this location at this time and date. We'll teach you on the fly. That's a good way to get a lot of contamination in your investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, a lot of those folks mean well, but they, I studied, of course, I grew up reading ghost stories. My interest in ghosts became very early in life. So I grew up with Hans Hosler. I every book I could get on Hosler, I got. I got a large collection in my library now. I watched the only ghost show that was out there at the time, which was Most Haunted. It was on BBC. And it had two, PhD parapsychologists. And, I got to watching that. That was where I started in the late 70s, early, 80s. I'm 58. So before I went to college, I was all about that. And I joined a local group here before I went to college called IPI, and they're no longer around. And, but one of the things I noticed on there wasn't a lot of training. There wasn't a lot of continuing education training. A lot of careers nowadays, whether it be real estate agent, doctor, nurse, paramedic, fire, we all have continuing education. It keeps us sharp on our skills. I make my members do that once a month. I always post a continuing education subject once a month. That keeps our team very good at what we do. And of course, you can't beat experience. We've had a long time. And that's something, unfortunately, a lot of people don't. But I think, a lot of it comes from just not educating yourself. There's lots of books out there. There's a tremendous amount, and they're good reads. I mean, it's worth picking one up and going through it and understanding. It's better than watching a TV show for training,
All right. Now, you mentioned Hans.
Yeah.
Do you think Hans, I like to call like that name, do you think Hans is the father of paranormal investigating? Considering he's not really an American, he's an Australian.
Yeah. Well, I think if we're talking the father of parapsychology or investigating, however you want to phrase it, I guess that would really go to Harry Price. That's probably the first recorded per se investigator out there, and he's got several books. Of course, he had the chance to go through a couple of haunts and investigate them that are no longer there, that are fantastic. And I would say, Hans, now Hans used a psychic approach, which was not something that our team does. We don't use a psychic. We use a methodology that is basically a debunking scientific methodology, and I can't calibrate a psychic. You have to do Vegas odds. You have to determine how many times you're right to how many times you're wrong. Now, I can't tell when they're right and wrong, so I can't use them. I don't say that they aren't psychics that are accurate. I always told everybody that Chip Coffey, every time I was around him at the Paracons, always gave me the creeps. I thought he was in my head. Now, his husband was very nice, but Chip always gave me that weird. Now, Patty Negri, on the other hand, didn't have that same effect on me, and or Stacy Cross, either one of those two. And they're nice people. I know them, but I don't use psychics in my investigation process. I think Hans did, and it was an interesting method. He used Sybil Leek for years in a lot of his books. He had two different psychics he worked back and forth with. But I think Harry Price, if I was going to have a pick, I'd go with Harry Price. I know he's English, and yeah, but it's hard to say in America where that lands. I probably have to say the father of parapsychology as it is in America today, Jason may have a good shot at that. Jason Halls, because Jason and Grant Wilson, because their show is probably the oldest American show that came out. I mean, unless you want to count Scooby-Doo and Funky Phantom from Hanna-Barbera.
No, there's one. Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler.
Night Stalker.
Night Stalker.
I have the entire series. I got an autographed picture from Darren McGavin. I love that guy.
Yeah, you got to throw him in there. Know what? And I think, and I really thought that he knew more about the things that he did on his TV show than what he really claimed. I mean,
he was a great actor, and he lived in Florida, not far from some of my relation. He lived in Cape Coral, and outside of Fort Myers. And I'll tell you, I grew up on those. And just a fun fact, so did Chris Carter. and he was the writer of X-Files and the inventor of X-Files. He got his inspiration for X-Files off of Night Stalker. And I can still remember as a child being scared as hell watching some of those episodes. I mean, those were the episodes when you turned them off after that 40-minute episode and you went to bed, you heard every sound that house made. I mean, it was just
Yep.
some of them were really, and I love every Halloween, we have a celebration for the members of Spirit, and we have an open house for those that don't have children and don't go out on Halloween. And we live out in the country, and that's one of the things we do. We play a couple of episodes of Night Stalker. And, I don't care which one you pick. They're all good. And I actually have the 2 movies as well that he made. But I would say, yeah, I mean, he's fictional. But, yeah, certainly that was certainly, if you want to go there, we can, that's about the same time Scooby-Doo came out, and that's the same kind of thing. I always tell people that's the first, real entry into investigation, if you will. As far as true life or actual investigating, I'd have to go back to Jason and Grant. I'm trying to think, but I can't think anybody older than that. There was a lot of people doing it then. The Warrens, for instance, which are primary demonologists, but they weren't on TV. They weren't weekly or out there as much. I mean, you saw them in the news, but not so much on television. Probably their stuff has become more famous after their passing. With the exception, a lot of people didn't know this, but Tony, which very nice guy, he's their son-in-law. For years while they were alive, he ran a YouTube channel, and it was a weekly broadcast he did, and he did a great job. I love going back and listening to some of those, but those are probably my opinion on the American pioneers.
I'm glad you mentioned the Warrens. Man, if the Warrens had social media back in the time that they were doing
God.
it, how
They'd
do
have
you,
been giants.
you think they would have been giants?
Oh, I think so. I think they get a lot of ridicule. I mean, because at the time they were living, this was still a subject matter that wasn't open. It kind of, I think paranormal television or social media is kind of a bell curve. Okay. And I think that, certainly we're coming down the backside of the bell. A lot of shows got canceled. I was at the Michigan Paracon, which is one of the best I've ever been to. And we used to go every year. That was one of our continuing education studies. And I found out they canceled Kindred Spirits. And, that, the year before, 2 years before that, I was talking to Bill from Mountain Monsters. And he kind of sadly told me, he said, well, we didn't get a call. Our season's done. We won't be having any more. That's always a sad thing in that world. And I think we're probably on the downside of that. But if they had Facebook, if they had a podcast, I think you would still... There's always the skeptics. I think there's a difference between a skeptic and a hater, but I think that those will always be there. But I think they were probably more in the 70s. It's like cops, for instance. I know a lot of police officers, and we actually get calls from the police department. And occasionally, I get calls from guys that are a little shook up and they want to, if they have a problem, they'll come and ask us. Since we're a scientific team, we tend to get more respect on that end. Now, I say more, we're still, when people, I always tell everybody, whenever they ask me what I do for a hobby, the only good thing about the word parapsychology, again, a lot of people don't know what that means. And sometimes you can say, well, I'm studying parapsychology and I have a practice team, and they take that and they assume it's some division of psychology and they walk away. Now, every once in a while you catch somebody who knows what it means, but you lose a certain amount of credibility. I recently moved into a new home. We bought a home in July, and I can tell you, don't move once you get old, because you want to hire that done. It just about killed me and my wife. And
I can imagine.
We're still unpacking crap, and we still have a half of a storage room we got to empty. But the neighbor behind me came up one evening, and I was getting ready to leave, and he says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I've got a lecture I've got to do, and I'm heading for Brownsburg." And he said, "Well, what do you lecture in?" Right there and then becomes that decision point that I've got to make. Okay, what do I do? If I tell them that, hey, I pardon the crash expression, but I hunt ghosts for a living. Yeah, that's always a little rough. And so, I have to be careful how I go about that. And, I said parapsychology, and without second, he says, "Oh, so you deal with ghosts?" And I thought, "Wow, okay, I'm impressed. He knows the word." And I said, "Well, in a roundabout way, yes." And he was very interested, and from that time forward, became one of our listeners on the podcast. Sometimes it doesn't go well. I was with the family friends that I went to Florida every year and stayed with, and they lived in Pine Island, right off Cape Coral. And I remember there was we had what we call in Florida, they have these great things. If you drink, you're in good, because they have all these older people go down and retire, and all they do is drink all day. And what they do is they hide the alcohol in Tervis tumblers, and they put a straw in it, and they run around all day with Tervis tumblers, start drinking about 6 a.m., and they end when they go to bed. If you ask them what's in the tumbler, they'll tell you it's tea. Anyway, but it's 5 o'clock club. And I always called him my stepfather. He was real good about things. He told me, so it's great. He says, we go down to the 5 o'clock, club. And he says, and basically we just bring a covered dish. He says, we don't have to cook but twice a week. And I knew these people from this get together, and they were very nice. He took us out on the boat to do some crabbing several times. Well, one night we were discussing things, and he says, "I heard you used to play golf." I said, "Yes, I have some health issues. I no longer play." I said, "But I do a lot in parapsychology." I said, "For time I was writing my first book," and I told him, I said, and he said, "Well, what is parapsychology?" I thought, "Oh boy, here we go." And I started describing what parapsychology was, and oh my God, his wife come unglued. She stood up. She actually chucked her plate, and when I say chucked, she just gave it a throw onto the coffee table and says, "Oh my God, you're working for Satan." I said, "Well, no, I'm not employed." And but I was trying to be jovial. She took it offensively. They got up and waltzed out of there, and I felt so bad, because this was friends of my step parents, so to speak. And I remember Jim looked at me and says, "Don't worry about it." He said, "They were a pain in the ass anyways, as we won't miss them." But they never did talk to him again after that. All because of one. I mean, I always tell my members, when you start out, choose wisely who you're going to tell what you're doing with this hobby. And I know a lot of people that have their own stories about things that have went bad. It's funny because a lot, and I'm a Shriner. I'm a Freemason and Shriner. And I belong to all the Shrine clubs. And of course, I belong to the Fireman's Club, but I also belong to the Police Club. And I usually do their lecture for their October Halloween thing, because they bring the ghost guy in for Halloween. That's my roundabout nickname. And, it's funny. They all joke about it to the first time they run on a scene that they have something going on. And then suddenly you're their best friend. They're blowing up your cell phone, and they've got a problem. One of the and of course, we in Spirit, we have a hotline that's open. Now, I always tell everybody it's open 24 hours. There isn't always somebody on it. We have a revolving number through a Google Voice number, so it goes out to the entire membership -2, and whoever's available tries to pick up the phone. If we can't, then we get the message, and one of us follows up. Well, I'll tell you, the long and short of this whole thing is, one night, way back when, we got a call from Gary, Indiana. You may know where I'm going with this. And it was a sheriff, and he was real shook. And he asked me, he says, "I've been trying to reach Chief Lawson. Is that you?" And I'm thinking, oh God, does he have a warrant? And, I'm just, I'm laughing about it. And he says, "I've got a problem." Well, unfortunately, he was one of the first original responding officers to the Gary house, the Gary Demon house. And this guy was shook. And he was asking for advice, and he says, "I'm here with a city police officer from Gary Police Department." I don't recall the names. I wouldn't give them out if I did. It's been too many years ago, but we still have the case files on it. Of course, at the time, we knew nothing about the Devil House. We had no clue. And he told me how, they'd had, he's seen a child go up a wall. And I, one of the things I recommended, I said, "Look, this could be the beginning infestation stage of possession." And I said, "You should probably contact the Catholic Church in the area." And he says, "Well, I'm not Catholic." I said, "It doesn't matter." I said, "The one thing about Catholicism is they do a lot of work in demonology, and they have priests that are trained in different areas. There's one here in Plainfield that we deal with." And I said, "That's where you want to start. If they're climbing the walls, that's probably where you want to start before you start with me." And I said, because it very well could be a case of beginning in possession at one of the 4 stages of possession. And, of course, we had no idea where this is going. Now, within a year, we knew this house that they called on was the house that was the Gary Demon house that would eventually be tore down. And I think the land is still owned by Zach Beggins of the Ghost Adventurers, but the staircase and the dirt from it was taken to his museum in Las Vegas. But we've had some very interesting calls, and the law enforcement becomes your best friend when they've seen something. It's kind of like I always tell people with skeptics. Skeptics will remain skeptic until they have their first experience. And I always tell a little story about one of our classes, but that's kind of the way with police officers. It's all fun and games until, the proverbial shit hits the fan. And, then they really want to talk to you and they'll hang on every word you got to say.
Right.
I get my lecture every year in October with the club. There's one or two cops in particular I've helped. And, there'll be a few snickers from the new guys in the audience. And they always stop and say, hey, don't laugh. Let me tell you about what I saw. And, that's the biggest testifying you can do, on that end. And I always, I know you had this subject from a previous podcast, but, skepticism is an interesting thing. And we had a master class one time. It was held at a 3-story building. It wasn't the best of areas. It really wasn't in a good area at all. And so I was told everybody, get your stuff. We got people watching a lot. We haven't had any trouble. And I had a police officer friend of mine come by and stick around and watch the cars. And so we go in the building. And there is an area we use for classroom, and a lot of the master class, 3/4 of it's classroom. It's a college level, parapsychology course. And so anyway, this one young man comes in with his girlfriend, tall lad, probably look like a basketball player, 6 something. I probably good 6'7". Looks at me and says, look, he says, I want you to know, I think this is all bullshit. He says, I don't believe in any of it. He says, but I had to come because she made me. He said, but I promise I won't disrupt your class or be disrespectful. I said, well, I appreciate that. I said, who knows? You might, learn something and maybe, you change your mind. He said, oh, I highly doubt it. And I said, okay. And so, the class went on, and all of a sudden we got to the point where we were doing the investigation. A few minutes into it, one of my people came up and said, hey, that guy, the big tall guy in the class? I said, yeah. He says, he just ran out of here like his ass was on fire and he's sitting out in his car. And I go, what happened? He said, I don't know. He says, he passed me and I didn't have time to ask him. So I told him, okay. So I walked out to the car, knocked on the window, and I said, sir, are you okay? He said, oh, yeah. I said, well, can I ask you what happened? He says, yeah. He says, I'll tell you. He says, I owe you an apology. I said, really? He says, yeah, I owe you an apology. He said, because some ghost child grabbed my hand, and he says, I felt every one of her fingers. And he says, I owe you a big apology. He says, and by the way, I won't be coming back in that building again. He says, when my girlfriend's done, just send her out. And I said, well, it's probably not safe to sit out here. He says, I'll take my chances with the living. Thanks. He rolled the window back up. But I think that day he was made from a skeptic to a believer. And sometimes that's all it takes,
That's all it takes. While we're on this topic, and this is a question I ask everybody that comes on our show, because I love to hear what people's different opinions are, and what they think. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Because we're talking about parapsychology, and we are talking about educating people, making sure that the world understands and knows what's going on.
Sure.
But with that being said, is from Hans to Nikolai Tesla, this big circle that we have, and I think everybody's in that circle. They're curious to know what's going on the other side. I think Nikolai actually made a device, and it was very successful, communicating with somebody to the other side. Now, with all this technology, well, now I don't know where it's at. Nobody knows where it's at. Why is that the scientific community keeps rejecting us?
Well,
why come they have not pull that chair out and says, welcome to the community?
Well, I'll tell you, we've been a pseudoscience for many years, and I'll take something out of a quote that Benegal said one time. He was a cryptozoologist, and he said it, if I had a dead Sasquatch and I drug him to every meeting, He said, let everybody take a look at them. And I went all over the country, and I took it even when it started to smell from decomposition to every meeting. They'd still look at me and go, it's fake. It's a mannequin. That's it. I think it goes back to the point of skepticism. Psychology, parapsychology, all the other science fields, they don't look at us as real. Cryptozoology got a leg up back when in 57, when they discovered the coelacanth, which was supposed to have been, extinct for millions of years. Since then, we've discovered numerous things that, were on that crypto list that are now there. So I think they're starting to look at it a little differently. UFOlogists, they've got their big kick 2 years ago. And I always tell a funny story with this because I have a buddy of mine. He always calls, goes, well, you were naval intelligence. You got connections. I don't know. I don't have connections. And, he always wants to know, when the government's going to talk about UFOs. And I was joking with him. Now, this guy's a really conspiracy theory nut. And he's kind of would wear aluminum hats. And I love him to death. He's a good friend. He wouldn't be listening to this, or I wouldn't be telling this story. But anyway, that night before, he was driving me nuts. And I said, look, the government's going to make a special announcement tomorrow. You'll get all your information. I had no freaking idea they were going to release the TikTok video the next day or any of that. I didn't know. I'm not in ufology. He called me and goes, oh my God, you were right. And I'm thinking, oh God, what was I right about? And it turns out, they released this information. So all the guys in ufology are going crazy. Well, the government admitted they're aliens. Well, not exactly. The government admitted there's stuff in the skies. They don't know what is or who owns it. So, that's not necessarily a good thing. But I think that most sciences will never accept us until it gets to the point that our science, our theorems, our laws, our theories, and all come together and can be proven to the point of no doubt. I think that's the only time that will happen. Everybody else, but okay, here's a good example. Chiropractic care. Most doctors turn their nose up at chiropractors, okay? And I've got a chiropractor. He's a great guy. And for his age, he's really fit. Reminds me of Jack LaLanne, and most people aren't old enough to remember him. But, he's got the muscles and the whole 9 yards. He's a surfer, and he's older than I am. And so, but anyway, he flies out to California and surfs. And the guy, chiropractic care for a long time was looked down, people looked down their nose. They weren't real doctors. I always laughed at the TV show 2.5 Men because one of the guys was a chiropractor. They always go, well, you're not a real doctor. It's kind of like that. We're into that same analogy. We're not looked at as a real science. And it's sad because I think there's so many advances that have come about over the years by people like you and me and guys running teams using equipment and doing experiments. I look back when we started back in 2000 and the equipment that was available to us. And oh my God, there wasn't that much available. Now we have all kinds of toolboxes of equipment. Our most recent investment was a paranormal bell. It looks like a little bellhop bell you ring, and it is triggered by EMF. And something the Ghost Stop came up with, and we have all kinds of trinkets and toys we use. But a lot of people still don't buy into that. And I think some of it goes back to faith. I'm not trying to get into the religious aspect, but some of it depends upon the individual's faith, not the religious faith, but the faith they have in what's out there. When I was very young, what got me into this was my father had seen the apparition of his mother after she'd passed away. He was probably 8, and she talked to him, and they had a long conversation. And, more than oftentimes at that time, and even still to this day, to a certain degree, we would say, well, that was a stress or a stress apparition that came to him, and it was something that his mind created. There would be a lot of things to explain it, except for the fact that, hey, it was a real ghost and she came back. A lot of people don't realize that whatever religion you pick, where you pick Judaism, Muslim, you pick Christianity, every one of those books, the Bible, the Torah, the Tanakh, they all have references to ghosts. And, so I always enjoy when I get these hardcore, and a lot of times I don't want to pick on any given religion, hardcore, Baptist, they'll go, well, that's you're dealing with a Satan when you look for ghosts. But yet, hey, the Bible talks about them, talks about witches, and it's kind of funny. We have a double standard there, and that's what they do in the science fields. They have a double standard, and we don't, we're not taken seriously. We are not,
Me personally, and I'm being honest with you,
Yeah.
I've always thought this. I always thought it's not what you know, it's who you know to able to sit at that table.
Sure. I mean, I guess we got a lot more exposure by going to the Paracons. I got to know Dave Schrader. I got to know, Jason Halls, and even though we were a family group at one time, but I got seeing these guys, and they seen us. Of course, we wear our trademark black shirts with logos, and they knew us. I walk in, Reverend Tim Shaw. Every time he sees me, comes up and hugs me. We see each other a couple times a year. The nice thing is, once you get into that arena, like you said, you get that seat at the table, you can make phone calls to these people and say, hey, I got something that I don't understand. I need a, input on this. What do you think? It's handy. But to get to that table, to sit in with all the, the Carl Sagans and the, and all those, that's, we're not permitted at that table. We're still kept at the kids' table. And, I don't know when that'll take place. I believe Benedigo had a really good example of that. No matter how many times you drag the dead body, no matter how bad it smells, they'll all catch and go, it's a fake. There are some people will just never be able to convince. Probably not in our lifetime, mine and yours. I mean, maybe something in the future.
Right.
It's hard to say.
Now, very interesting. How credible? Because this has become a new norm for me. I got a lot of cases where parents are like, my kid is seeing this. How credible, or what do you think the percentage is on kids sightings of ghosts and spirits? Or do you think it's possible that they could just be playing, you know at a young age?
Mm-hmm.
Man, their imagination is crazy.
Sure. I always joke and tell everybody that, in a investigator's family, that when the child starts talking about, a invisible friend, out come all the cameras, the EMF detectors, and but normally, I mean, I grew up with a make believe friend. His name was Dick Martin. I remember being told that. I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I really don't think it was a ghost. I think in my case, it was just a friend. But I think that's a problem, because children, we know children animals, for one thing, are a lot more sensitive than we are. You and I have been programmed by the schools we went through, and we've been told that, hey, for years, ghosts don't exist, Bigfoot doesn't exist, and UFOs doesn't exist, and we've been trained, and we'll say trained isn't a good word. I would say and brainwashed is probably closer, but I mean, that's a little rash term, but I would say we're closer with that. But we conditioned. We have been mentally conditioned to that norm, where the kids haven't. So I think they see a lot more things. We had a case not long ago. We jokingly called Puff the Magic Dragon. It was probably about 7 years ago. And a gentleman called us, and he was in he was raising 2 kids by himself. His wife had left. His wife had a drug problem, and she left him with these 2 kids. And they'd taken over a house that his aunt had passed away. She was ambulatory, strictly bed-bound, wheelchair-bound, and actually her bedroom was still set up with a crane to get her out of the bed into the wheelchair. And when she died, she left the house for them to be able to raise the kids. We called him and talked to him, which is, he called us first on our hotline, and we talked to him, and he told us what was going on. And so you got to be careful when you deal with children, because, you don't want to give them any leading questions. And one thing our case manager did, she took a sketch pad we carried with us, some crayons, and said, hey, draw what you've seen. And the report was that they'd seen these things that looked like little miniature dragons that would get up on the coffee table, and that they would move around, and the kids drew out perfect examples of what would look like Puff the Magic Dragon animated, only very small. And we asked them when they saw them, and they said, well, a couple of times. And I said, well, who told you, what do they look like to you? And they look like dragons or mini monsters, but good monsters. I said, well, why do you call them good monsters? They said, well, they were friendly. They smile like a dog smiles when it pants. And I said, okay. So we agreed to go in and do an investigation. We got nothing. I mean, we spent 4 or 5 hours. We got nothing. I mean, it was then when we re-interviewed him, because we've stumbled on something by accident. And one thing we don't do, and I want to make sure everybody understands this, we don't go in residence, open doors, or pry. I mean, we might open a closet or something if we've got activity there, but we don't generally do anything. One of our members knocked a metal can off, and it made some strange sounds. I picked it up. When I opened it up, it was full of marijuana and a pipe. And I thought, oh dear. And I put it back, and we pretended we didn't know it was there. Well, I asked him, I said, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I said, I need to know, are you a recreational drug user? And he said, yes. He said, but I only do it in small portions. And I said, okay, did you do it around the children? He said, well, not exactly. He says, I go in another room and I come out. Was the smoke out here? Yeah, the smoke was out here. And I said, did you see the dragons first or the kids? Well, he saw the dragons first. So, as we started putting this together, we realized this is probably something related to the marijuana because we did not receive a thing. And we said, hey, here's the thing. Some things to think about. Maybe you shouldn't do that around your children. And, maybe you got to be kind of careful because it maybe affect you. Maybe it was a little stronger than what you thought it was. And, he made it a point to smoke outside to make sure the smoke wasn't affecting the kids. Never got a call back, but we never found anything. So, I mean, the worst case I can remember actually happened spring of last year. I got a call from a mother. Came in on our hotline. She says, my daughter says there's a ghost friend with her. And I said, did she say ghost or a friend? She says, no, she said a ghost. And this lady was in northern Indiana, about an hour's drive north. And I said, okay. I said, well, let me ask you this. I said, this ghost friend, what is she saying? Well, she said she's wanting her to harm members of the family. I said, has this daughter been treated for psychology, any kind of psychological issues? And she said, yeah, she'd been seen a couple of times. I said, I'd like you to take her back to the psychiatrist or therapist and have them reevaluate her before we take anything on. She said, okay. She says, you don't think it's a ghost? I said, I didn't say that. I want to make sure we get all of the mental health issues out of the way before we tackle this. And we're no different than police or fire. I think every paranormal investigator out there has a obligation, one, to learn about mental issues of mental health, knowing what schizophrenia looks like, knowing what other mental conditions look like, because you're going to run into those. If you're in this any length of time at all, and you're having a hotline, or you have an email address, or a website, or a podcast, you're going to have somebody that calls that has those problems. And so we told the lady, we said, okay, well, she came back and said, well, the counselor changed some of the medication. I asked her what meds they were on. And she says, I think she's still talking to this girl. I said, we'll make arrangements to come up here this weekend. I said, and what my intent was to interview the girl and see if we could get the entity to come out and see if there was an entity there we could pick up. The mother called me on the Friday before. We were going up on Saturday and said, we have a problem. She says, I won't need your assistance. I said, I'm sorry, what's the matter? She said, well, my daughter tried to kill us. She got several knives out of the knife block in the kitchen, and she had laid them out to kill us. We found out about it, interceded, took her down to the hospital. They have admitted her into the psych ward, and she will be there from this point forward. And she says, she claims that the entity went with her. And so a lot of people ask me, okay, so what did you do? Well, that's all I did. At this point, our group can't move any further. It's a child, so you have to have the parents' permission to even talk to them. And I actually have a form. Now, this is something that small investigation groups don't do. You have to have, there's a lot of liability here. I mean, there really is, especially when dealing with children. So we have a form that allows a parent to release the permission to talk and to examine the child. And, they can say stop at any point in time, and we're obligated to stop right there, pull all the equipment back out if they have an issue. This particular case, it was very sad because this girl got committed. We weren't able to help. And maybe it may have been more of a mental health issue than it was, a parapsychology issue. I don't know. We'll never know unless I told her, I said, certainly if she comes out and you start experiencing problems, give me a call. you just never know. Forms and knowing the legalities. I know my one member in particular, I think a load of, he actually mentioned the other day we need to teach a legality class and offer it for a master class for other groups, because knowing what forms to have and what you need to sign off on. For instance, when we do an investigation, we have a contract, and that contract has to be signed by the property owner. Now, if the property is being rented, one contract has to be signed by the property owner and one by the leasee. And that allows us to go in and do the investigation. At the end of the investigation, no matter how late it is, the leasee and or property manager has to sign off again to release us from liability that once we're done. We ask them to go in and look around, make sure that's very important. And I'll tell you, all these forms came about by mistakes along the way that we did. And we realized, luckily, none of them ever hurt us or damaged our credibility. But you learn that way. Unfortunately, sometimes it's school of hard knocks. But children, I think they're very, very sensitive. I think they see far more than most adults do. Their minds aren't conditioned in such a way. They still are open thinkers, much like Tesla, I guess, if you want to really think about it.
Yes. What percentage would you think that most of these cases that are out here are that are contributed to not knowing what your medication is, not knowing who makes your medication,
Mm-hmm.
and because we know today in this day and world, a small pill can have different types of symptoms in there.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
So, I mean, who's to say that just because you go to a somebody that can help you,
Yes.
but you're still on the same medication that is allowing you to see what you see and do what you do. So, what would be the purpose of even allowing the kid to even go to see a psychiatrist when you're just going to put them back on the same medication?
Well, and that is a problem. There's two things there, really, what you're asking. And the percentage, I don't know. I always joke. When we talk about paranormal attachments or parapsychology attachments, I always tell people that, I have my own formula. 75% of the time to 80% of the time, ghosts attached to houses or locations. 15% of the time they attach to objects, 5% of the time they attach to people. But I always have this disclaimer. Larry the Cable Guy says that 72% of all figures are made up on the spot. And I always use that disclaimer. I get a little bit of a laugh, but it's the same kind of thing. I mean, if I'm just guessing on the figures, I'd go almost 50-50. I think that there's a lot more drug interaction, some intentional, some unintentional. Example, about 4 years ago, we had a case from a gentleman. He was either Kokomo or Anderson. I don't recall which, but he called in and he told me, he says, I'm experiencing ghosts, but the ghosts I'm experiencing are vampires. They're vampire ghosts. I go, well, he says, you ever run across that? I said, nope, I got to say that's a new one on us. I mean, I've never had a vampire ghost. So he would explain this to me. We start out the usual way. And I suggested, hey, because I thought maybe he might be having some issues. I said, are you on any medications right now for your health? I said, you don't have to answer that, but I'm just asking. And he said, well, yeah. He said, he turned out he's a fellow veteran, and he was going to the VA, and the VA had him on some drugs. And, I knew two of them weren't a good mix. They usually were caused imbalance. Now, one, I got lucky. Normally, they don't give you what drugs they're on, and I always feel like I'm kind of like in the movie Ghostbusters, the very first one where they've got the librarian on the table and they're asking her what medications you're on and are you menstruating right now? I mean, oh my God, they're kind of, they're questions that as a client that may come a little more shocking when we ask them. But, I asked him and he said, yeah, this is what the doctor had prescribed. Well, the VA has a bad habit of a doctor will do a tour duty there and then go, and then you'll get a new doctor, and you get a new doctor about every 8 months, and they don't keep up on the medication. I told him, I said, look, I thought we'll do a little psychological try. We'll try to do some, suggestive things. And I suggested they put salt lamps in every room. He had a very small place, wasn't very expensive. I told him to go to Walmart or Amazon and get them. He did, and cut down, but it didn't work. And I knew then there was still a problem. So I asked his daughter if I got her to call me. I said, "Would you take him to the VA and have this checked?" Well, it turned out 2 of his medications were incompatible. As soon as they changed them, no more ghosts. And she and he both called me back and thanked us. And I mean, our group has to do. Sometimes, as an investigator, you're not only investigating paranormal, but you may be sorting it out. You may have to determine what's a mental health issue. You may have to determine, there's all kinds of things that come up. And I always say that there's more to this job. It's kind of like being a fireman all over again. Firemen do lots of things. We're part chemist. We have to deal with hazmat instances. We're part engineer. We're part structural analysis. We have to know a lot of things. And to do this job and to do it right, you really need that knowledge. And, I think too many groups don't have that. And you got to be careful. You don't want to get to the point someone commits suicide and that's on you. I mean,
Yep.
I don't want that to happen. And if there's any doubts in my mind, before we talk parapsychology, I'm going to go, hey, you need to go be evaluated, and you need to give the doctor my information, and he needs to contact me with your permission and tell me what the evaluation produced before we move forward. Sometimes that ends the case. We never hear from them. I think more than 50% of the time, there is mental health issues involved. And that didn't used to be that way. I think before, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I'd say probably 75% of the time they're parapsychology, 25% of the time they're, mental issues. But we have so many different one thing you brought up was who makes the medication. And, I know I was looking at one of my bottles. And one thing about getting older is great. You get tons of medication. I got every color pill and shape you can imagine. And I was looking at one of the bottles, and I realized the company that Optimal RX that provides our meds had sent me the same drug from a different manufacturer. It's different shape, different color. And of course, I pour all mine in together as long as they're in the same bottle with the same dosage. And I was looking at that thinking, I just wonder if there's any difference between these two manufacturers. And you really don't know. I mean, you have no idea. Some people, everything affects them differently. Matter of fact, one of my members just started a new med the other day, and he asked me something about it. And a year ago, I was on it, and it about killed me.
Yeah.
Everybody has different reactions. So you
Yeah.
have to take that in account. You really do.
Well, Chief, I gotta go. I got a reaction. Let me go use the bathroom, and I'll be right back.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, I'll wait here.
All right. Sorry about that.
It happens. I don't know. I may have to at some point, but I'm holding in there right now.
Woo, Chief.
Yes, sir.
You are a profession. Every profession, no matter what you do, construction. If you're a firefighter, if you're a policeman, if you're an attorney,
Hmm.
if you're a CEO of a major company,
Yes,
all those jobs are dangerous.
sure.
With
Ours
that
are
being,
just as dangerous as any other.
yeah. So give me how from a scale from 1 to 50, where would you put parapsychology at as one of the most dangerous jobs out there?
Well, hmm. Um, I'd say we're at least at 40. There's numerous dangers to our job. Our own personal mental health, much like firemen, policemen, there's a chance of burnout. And I always worry about that. I always constantly watch my people. We do some things among a group as a group that are fun activities, bonding activities, we call them. Certainly going to Paracons is one, but that's
Mhm.
partly continuing education. We have a summer cookout where we ask the members, hey, if your spouse is not a member, bring that spouse with us. Get a chance to see who we are and what we do. And of course, I know a lot of the non-member spouses within the group, and they're great people. We do a winter. Usually, we do a Christmas party, and unfortunately, I feel horrible about canceling the group's Christmas party this year because we had some problems that couldn't be gotten around, and unfortunately, I'm going to try to later have a winter get together. But that healthy mental health situation is very important. The things and places we investigate come with a risk. Take for instance Waverly Hills in Kentucky. That has open elevator shafts. Now they've made it safe by blocking those off. Some of the areas we go into don't have that safety net. And we run a tour, lights on tour, we'll say, before that happens to make sure we can isolate those. Then, of course, there's always that risk of attachment. What if something comes home with you? We do everything we can. As I always tell people about firefighting, we take all the risk away we can. We try to do the same thing in parapsychology. We do a protection prayer. At the end, we do another protection prayer to bond whatever is there to that location and doesn't come home with us. But the risk still stands. I think there's a lot of risk in parapsychology. I think if people knew how much of a risk was there, they certainly would not, they would think it over harder. I won't say they won't get involved, and I apologize, I'm muting my phone. I forgot to mute it. But I think that they really need to consider it. It was part of our orientation. We tell them,
Mhm.
we have what we call a break point, and it's a time that they can DOR, drop on a request. And before we start the actual training portion, we go through a lot of this with them. We said, hey, these are the possibilities. If you want out, now's the time. Say so, and no hard feelings. You can pack your stuff and you can go on home, and watch it on TV. But it is. There's a risk. And I would say out of 1 out of 50, I'm going to go 40. It'd be somewhere between 35 and 40. I mean, it's greater. I don't know that it has the same risk as firefighting and police work, or even being a lawyer, or being a lot of things, but it's a different, every field has its difference. Construction work, whatever, they all have their own specific risk that are determined by that field. And I think with our field, 40 would be a good number.
Okay. Yeah, great. Hey, sound good to me. What would you do if somebody just comes up to you and say, "Hey, Chief, if I'm gonna do this, I want to be trained by the right person, and that would be you." Would you consider it?
Well, this is a good argument. Good question. I'll tell you why, because we have a lot of teams out there that occasionally will call and say, do you guys offer any kind of course for teams? We've always said no. And the problem is, and I tell you, I find this in nationwide response teams, being a fire chief for a nationwide response team. When I went to Hurricane Katrina, it was a mess because the federal guys were blocking off areas. We ended up sitting for 2 days doing nothing because they didn't want us in. And, you know, there was a lot. It goes back to the saying, same team, same team. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to save lives. And, you know, it was such, because one of the first things we ever went out on was 9/11. And we spent a week at Ground Zero. And there, any bit of help was so appreciated. Nothing was said, nothing was asked. It wasn't, hey, what are you doing here? Where are you from? It's like, hey, appreciate everything you're doing. And then we go to Katrina and it's like, hey, yeah, just keep your ass back in the camp till we tell you different. And it unfortunately, that same mentality comes with parapsychology. Point in question. There's a location here in Indiana, and once a year they have this big paranormal fair, and it has good intentions. And there's been 2 people now that have been trying to get this thing together. One did it for years, never had any luck, and backed out, but another one's picked it up. But the problem is when you have these things and you get all the, you get everybody in one kettle. You get, your psychics, you get your folks that have haunted locations advertising their location. They're paid to investigate locations, and then you get all these groups, and all the groups are out there to see what the other group has. It's a proverbial, pardon the expression, this is going to be very, very bad, but it's a dick measuring contest. That's what it is. I mean, they get everybody out there to see who has the best equipment. And I don't bring equipment. I don't set any of our equipment out. One, it's a risk for theft. Number 2, if my people aren't watching, that stuff can walk, and it's expensive. It came out of all our pockets. But 2, why should I display my equipment? My reputation and my group's reputation should speak loudly. And we don't have to set up a lot of, we do have a little picture frame that's electronic that goes through some pictures to entertain people. But, I had a guy ask me one time, he said, all these other groups got all their equipment. Where's yours? It's in a locked cabinet. Why? And he goes, well, why don't you have it out here? I said, we're not investigating anything. This is a PR event. We brought pamphlets, we brought paperwork, and we brought some pictures. That's what you get. And I think too many of these groups, when they jump out there, that's part of it. It's a competition, and it shouldn't be. We're all trying to forward the field. Now, but that's the way it's always been. You said Tesla earlier. You mentioned him. Tesla was in a big go around with, with several people on that technology. And I'm thinking of a name that has left me, who invented, he's the, Edison. I'm sorry, Thomas Edison. And that was probably one of his biggest rivals. Edison actually made a apparatus to communicate with the dead. It was made with potassium pomegranate. It's on display in Fort Myers, Florida, in the Henry Ford Museum. It's still on display. That one didn't disappear, but we don't have any evidence it actually worked either. It's an interesting contraption. I've got some pictures of it, but the problem is there's always competition in these fields, and the problem is too many of these groups look at each other as competition. Now we've have another group here that's been around a long time. And they've been around. I used to know the president of that group for a while. They changed hands. I always jokingly say we don't do elections. It's not a democracy. It's an I'm-ocracy. I'm in charge, and it's my group. If you don't like it, you can leave at any time. But, that's kind of the way that I do, and I've done that for years. They reelect people, which I think is part of the problem they have with management. But, ghost chasers have been around a long time. There's other groups here I know of, and there's some that have went out. Dennis from Indy South Paranormal, he sold his, gave it all up and bought a pizza business, ironically. And he's pretty happy, I guess. I haven't heard from him in years. A couple people retired, and we've been around long enough to have retirees. We have a couple of people out of our group that retired, but there was one group called Paranormal 911. I knew them well. The woman was a medic, and her husband was a fireman. And they retired, moved to Florida, and I think that, it's viewed as a competition. Who can get I've had people, a couple of good stories, the My Ghost Story people, they bugged me to death for a long time. They would call up and they'd say, we'd like to have you on to discuss some of your cases. Okay. I said, that's fine. My rules. One, you recognize the group and you recognize the group name. Okay. Not just me. I'm not a, a glory hog. I want everybody recognized. Number two, we get to wear our gear. And I said, we can't do that. I said, then, go find somebody else to pester because I'm not doing it. And numerous ones. The best one ever, a young man who came out of University of Indianapolis. He came to us from a group that tried to form over there and didn't make it. Great guy. And he now owns a pickle peddler, which are these little carts they pedal around the downtown areas of towns. He owns one in Texas, actually. I think he's at DFW. I don't know, Dallas, Fort Worth, or one of those two. But he owns a whole, franchise down there. He left us to go there. But we got this one email, and it's around the time that Naked and Afraid came out on TV. And they wanted to start a paranormal series called Naked and Scared. And they sent me an email because we had shot a pilot for a group that was doing a show called The Shift here with the Indianapolis Police Department. Came down and wanted to shoot a pilot because they were thinking about getting a replacement show for ghost hunters for Jason and Grant. So anyway, the requirements were we could, we had to be naked. And I, I'll never forget. I brought it up at the meeting. We have a meeting once a month we do, and we do it right here where I'm at now. This is under construction. So what you're seeing behind you is part construction. But this is what we call the crypt. The crypt is our room that we named. It's a conference room in my home that we do all of our, our meetings, and we meet once a month here. We review evidence here. We have all the stuff we need here is cabinets and storage and so forth. But anyway, he asked me, he said, I sent this out and said, hey, we've got a job offer on TV. If anyone's interested, let me know. It was a joke. He emailed me back and says, can we wear tennis shoes? Hell, at my age, I don't look good naked. I've realized that, that came a long time ago. And I sure as hell aren't hunting ghosts naked. I don't want to scare anyone. We're not doing that. But we actually I kept the email. I said, I ought to frame it. It was just kind of a big joke. But yeah, my young guy thought we were seriously considering this. There was no one in the group seriously considering that. But, we've been invited numerous times for that kind of stuff. But again, it's competition. Someone asked me one time, they said, well, you don't have some of the stuff Jason and Grant does. I said, no, they're also sponsored by GM. All their vehicles are bought. None of mine are paint to match because I can't afford that,
Right.
Competition. That's probably one of the biggest problems between small groups, and a lot of the groups that are coming out, they don't ask for help. I have a few groups that will send me EVPs or photos and say, can you tell me what you think of this? We're not sure. We've looked at it. We want your opinion. I'll be more than happy to do that. I've done that for groups on many occasions. Several of my people have helped out. I mean, it's not just me. I mean, there's a lot of people on my team that are very qualified and willing to do it. But, there is a lot of that adversary competition in one's mind. And, the one thing I've loved about the Paracons, when you go, especially when I'm outside of Indiana, you're up to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, you're not a threat to anybody up there. And they're all great. They stop you, want to talk to you. I mean, I don't know how many, matter of fact, you contacted me not long after we got back in August of last year. And we had so much going on, and we had a pretty good caseload at the time. So, but, it's sad, but it's true. I mean, unfortunately, the mindset of investigators, they all want to make a name for themselves. And I get that. But you don't want to make a name for yourself the wrong way. That can swing both ways,
Yeah, that's a double door right there. You can go swing both ways. What do you think about the future generation of paranormal investigators? The ones that are out now, the ones that are on YouTube, TikTok, and all the other social media outlets that are here and aren't going anywhere.
I think they're picking up speed. I mean, YouTube, it's certainly a media that's out there. I know you and I were joking earlier, and one thing is we're getting ready to go video. We haven't gone there. We have a traditional podcast, audio only, and we started a YouTube channel, and then we decided we wanted to combine the podcast and YouTube. Too hard to have two divisions. We'd have to have more people. It was too hard to manage. One thing I can tell you is, and certainly we're close to being there. We wanted to launch it at the beginning of this year, and unfortunately, several things, including the move of the facility and everything else, made it impossible. We're hoping to get launched by later this year. But I think that's the new medium. When we were up at Paracon, there's a lot of different broadcast media that are popping up. Mike Rexseller he was advertising one, and I'd have to look to tell you what it was, but I mean, he had one that they were doing on. I know Patty Negri has one. Unfortunately, Patty Negri has got in with Zach Beggins on something, and I tend to. One thing is, I'll tell you, I'm trying to be as polite as I can. The Ghost Adventurer crew doesn't show up anywhere, so they don't. They're too good for Paracons. We don't get them there. But I'll tell you, people like Dakota Landing and Chelsea, they're hot. I mean, last year we were standing at one of the lines, and there was this line wrapping around the room to get their autograph. And I was standing next to Jason Greff from Ghost Hunters. And I looked at him, I said, "You remember when you used to be this popular?" He just started laughing. I said, "Yeah, fame is short. And these kids are the hottest thing on the block. I mean, they kind of got screwed over by Ghost Adventurers. They've got their own channel. They're running, the Destination Fear crew has done really well. I think their methodology is good. Their handling of evidence is sound. I think they started the same way that Jason and Grant originally started. They started out of a construction trailer. They didn't have people to go over their evidence. They had to go over their own evidence. For years, I can remember, and this is things people have forgotten. A lot of people see these TV shows and they're misled. I noticed, I can't remember the other gentleman you interviewed here a while back that brought that up. And what you don't see is the hours and hours and hours of evidence review. If you put 4 cameras out and say you do a 4-hour investigation, that's 16 hours per person, which we require 2 different people to view it. So we have a double redundant check. That's 32 hours of evidence review for 1 camera. Well, for 4 cameras. I'm sorry, 4 cameras. Same thing with tape recorders. And we put dead mics, which a dead mic in our terminology is a recorder left in a room the entire time we're there. And people come and go. The investigators may have a second recorder, but we leave one there to hear what happens after the team moves through the room. And every one of those recorders, if you're doing a 4-hour investigation, that's 8 hours of review. If you got 4 recorders, that's 32 hours. 64 if you got 8, which a lot of times happens. That's not counting your SD session tape you've got to go through, the thermal imager, the SLS. I mean, oh my God, there's ton. It can very well take a couple weeks. And when you have people that work full-time jobs, it makes it hard. I'll tell you, one of the big jokes we have at the Shrine, we said that there's nothing that gets in the way of drinking worse than a full-time job. And it's the same way with investigating. It's very hard. I've got one lady who runs a medical office. I have a gentleman who is an executive for a chemical firm. I had a police officer recently that was on our group and had to leave. I've got a gentleman like myself. He is a EMT with the city IMS. We have another gentleman who manages a furniture store. We have another lady who is a LPN. We have a lot of diverse background, but all these folks have jobs. Now, I'm retired. My wife is retired, so we can do more with the retirement time because we have more time per se. Although, don't ever tell anybody you're retired. That's a good way not to have time. They find things for you to do. But yeah, that's one of the worst things that ever happened to us. But I'll tell you, they don't see that portion. When you're watching a TV show, the gentleman says about a nutshell. Yeah, you're getting just the parts. They've already gone through all this evidence. They picked the hot, what we call possible hits out. And that's what you get to see, because that's all the people are interested in. If you were watching a TV show and you had to sit through 2 weeks of one evidence, you'd never watch the show again. That's about ratings. It's about making money. I mean, that's a money-making industry. We don't make money on this job. No one pays us. It's a labor of love. We're here because we want to be here. When I retired, everybody asked me, I said, Are you moving to Florida? I go, hell no. Although when I was clearing snow yesterday, I got thinking that could be a better decision. But anyway, the thing is, I put all my time and effort and retirement into this. My tech manager, when he retires, already told me, he says, I intend to spend a lot of time with you, and we're going to do a lot more because that's where he wants to be. I've already started my second book. I want to be part of this field. I want to leave a legacy. I don't want necessarily to be famous. I mean, half of my people, we had a TV show call us today and said, hey, we'll pay you to be on the TV show. One of my guys has a wonderful career. I wouldn't have him quit for anything, because if he did, TV programs last usually on average 1 to 2 to 3 years tops. I mean, of course, Jason has, Ghost Hunters has a longer run, and there's always exceptions to the rule. I think Kindred Spirits had 8 years, but I mean, generally speaking, unless it just takes off, the most you can guarantee is 3 years, and then you're back out on the street again. I always felt sorry for a lot of the guys when I was at Paracons, because they sell their books, they sell, oh hell, I've had some guys selling used books. I've had guys selling everything in the world. I bought some cell phone charging cables off of one of the TV hosts. Let's put it that way. I had them for sale because, hey, this is where they make their money. Once the show has paid them what they've got, they still have to make a living. And, when you're working, it's hard to review that evidence. People don't see that. When they get a very glamorous, grandiose view of paranormal investigating. So when they arrive to me and say, hey, look, I want you to train me because I like the way you, and we've had several people. The last guy came on said, hey, I've looked at every team in Indiana off their websites that have one. You're the only guys that look like they know what they're doing. And that was a great compliment. I was extremely flattered. But I told them, it's like joining the Marines or the Navy or the Air Force or Marine Corps or Army or the Space Force. We have requirements. We only take a chosen few. Now, I'm going to skip back to a question you asked me earlier. If someone came to me and said, hey, I want you to train me, I think the question that be, hey, are you wanting to be trained for our team? Or are you wanting to be trained to start your own team? That would make a difference. And I don't know how I would answer that. I guess when that time comes, I'll have to certainly formulate an answer. But it would be hard to say. I don't want to look like I'm worried about competition, because I'm not. I would rather train somebody to start his own group and know that group isn't going to make the mistakes I've seen a lot of groups make, and that he'll make a good investigator and help forward the field. I think that's a lot better. But getting back to, everything else, as far as new investigators, I think they're great. Of course, Adam and Amy came off of TAPS, which is a different methodology. What they took, they started out with the same methodology, and they kind of evolved, and they started using, for one, they used, which was kind of unique. Of course, TAPS never used a psychic investigator. They started using a psychic investigator to verify, not to go in and tell them anything. They would do the investigation, and they come back and say, hey, this is what we found. What do you see? And most of the time, they wouldn't even tell them what they found. They'd just ask them to walk through, and they would use that as a blind study to verify what they had. I thought that was pretty interesting. I'll tell you, one of the biggest moves we made of recent in the last 2 years, we started using the Estes method, which was the first time we ever allowed a spirit box in the group. And we used that as part of the Estes method. It was developed by MIT, and it's a double-blind study, and it works pretty well. It doesn't work all the time. And I think that's another thing, too. A lot of people that get involved in this don't realize that you're not going to have the same success that people on TV do, because they have, they didn't show you the other 42 hours that they had nothing going on. They just picked that out, and people don't understand that. But I think the Dakota landings of the future and those, I think they've got a great shot.
You mentioned a name, and my mind started wondering, is Dave and Phil, are they related?
I'm sorry, who again?
Because you mentioned Dave Schrader.
Dave Schrader, yep.
Now, is he somewhere related to Phil Schrader or Schroeder?
I don't know. I don't believe so, but I don't know that for a fact. I know Dave in a professional way. We might have drank together a couple of times. I hate to admit that, and Dave would. Dave has a wonderful podcast. My cousin, Greg Lawson, is on it quite a bit. He's an author, wrote several books. I don't know if he's related to Phil or not. I really don't know.
You know who Phil is, right? Or was. Yeah. I think he's dead now. I think the government killed him.
Oh, I don't know if he did or not. I know he's not on anything anymore.
He's not. He kind of fell. Yeah. I think they got him because he was coming out with a lot of stuff that the government didn't want him to speak upon, and I think he got hit by a hit and run.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Now,
have to look into that.
yeah.
I have, I have to look into that just to see because I
That's
have
a
not
good
heard
question. I don't know.
because yeah, because when you mentioned that name, I'm like, dude, I thought that guy was dead or his brother was dead.
Dave did a lot of he was originally on the TV show. He's one of the three hosts of the Hosler Files while it was on for a short period of time. Then he did Ghosts of Butte, Montana. He's done he's done a ton of stuff. Dave's a great guy. He had a cohort for a long time, Shane Pittman. Shane's also a very great guy. Poe Shane, they abused him to no end. I remember one of the stories that come to mind was in one of the Hosler file investigations, they put Dave had been down a crawl space and he farted all through the crawl space. He'd had like eggs or sauerkraut the night before. So there's this horrendous gas in the crawl, and they shoved Pittman down in there, poor Shane. They call him poor Shane. And they shoved him down there, and Shane keeps going, "Oh my God, there's something paranormal down here. There's smell of body decaying." And he come out, and they didn't tell him for like a day that David went down there and farted. And oh my God, poor Shane, he had a rough life in that show. But I always tell my anybody that's on that listens to us on the podcast, go check out the Hosler Files. It's on Discovery Plus on Discovery. It's a good show. Dave is a good guy. He's never told me he's been related to Phil. I think he brought that up at some point. He never had,
Yeah, Dave.
Closer to find out. I don't know.
Well, Dave died in January 11th, 96.
Phil did?
Yeah, Philip Sharp. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I'll have to ask Dave when I see him. I don't know. I'm trying to get him aligned for our show too. I'll have to ask him if he's related. I know who you're talking about. There's several people that have been, I call it spirited away. We don't know what happened to them. And people always ask me, does that happen in the intelligence community? I say, I don't answer that unless we put all of our cell phones in a Tesla cage bag and we go out somewhere we can't be heard. I mean, I don't talk about that. I don't accuse the government of any of that, but I'm not saying that they wouldn't do it. I mean, I think we're all would be stupid and naive to think that things like that don't happen.
I wouldn't put nothing past those little boogers.
Oh no. And you'd be surprised what they would do. And I have people go, okay, one of the biggest questions I always get is, why don't they admit to the fact they have a Bigfoot or they know ghosts exist? Well, somewhat I understand that. Somewhat. I'm gonna use that as a cautionary phrase. People sometimes can be very stupid and act like sheep. Okay. When you're a firefighter and you go on nationwide deployment, you find out how quickly people can act like sheep. And what I mean by that is they will act stupid as hell in large groups, and any kind of loud sound, they'll herd and move and stampede. Unfortunately, I was really surprised that the release of information, the government admitted, hey, there's stuff in the skies we don't know what the hell is. I was surprised that didn't send everybody into orbit. Certainly there's a few YouTubers out there I always get a kick out, but I'm not mentioning any names because I don't want to make any enemies with them. But they're what I call tinfoil hatters. And they're great. Sometimes my wife thinks it's annoying, but I love to watch them because some of their content is just hilarious. And there's one in particular, and everybody that knows me will know who I'm talking about. And he was showing how to shoot robotic dogs the other day in case the government invaded. I don't put anything past the government. My wife is a veteran of the U.S. Army. I think anyone that has served or been into a government position like firefighting, police, law enforcement of any type, they get this. And there's a lot of things that go on that people will never know about. It doesn't surprise me because if they present a risk, there's a certain clause that allows the government to do that, at least in their minds. And so I don't doubt that a bit. I've had people say, well, if you had proof, would you come out with it? It certainly, I can't say I would or wouldn't, but I mean, it would certainly be a consideration. You might end up disappearing, and you just never know.
I'm gonna have to call my friend Sean Ryan and see if I can get you on his show.
I'd be more than happy to. If just have him reach out to me. we've
Do you
got.
know do you know who Sean Ryan is?
I know who he is. I don't know him, but
Yeah.
I know who he is. Okay, yeah, I know who he is. Yeah, one of the things that I still to this day. Okay, and there's two things, and my wife, thank God, she puts up with me because there's two things I love to do. We recently, after Christmas, for whatever reason, decided to go back through all the X-Files and watch them from beginning out. Yeah, that's a great thing about streaming television now. You can find anything you want. I actually bored my wife at Halloween. She'd never seen Killdozer. It's on YouTube. If anybody's never seen it, there's some very famous names before they were famous. It's a horrible B movie. Me and my wife love B horror films, and we'll sit and watch them occasionally. But we're going back through X-Files, and it's fun to go through. But I'll tell you what, the conspiracy theories are, that's what I grew up. I'm an X, Generation X. I mean, that's what I grew up on, and I still look at that. I enjoy those. I enjoy looking at them because you never know, and I always tell people I'm careful because you just never know what may happen, and I've had some very strange incidents. I don't talk a lot about my past experiences involving those unless I have certain circumstances and the people are very close to me. Because you don't know if it gets out, it could cause a problem,
Oh, definitely. Chief Lawson, man, this has been a great conversation.
It has, and I hate it. I mean, I've been enjoying every bit of it.
I really appreciate you coming. If I can get you back on the show soon,
Sure.
to discuss more topics,
Uh-huh.
In the community world. But tell the world how to get a hold of you if they need to be, or if they're in Indiana and they just want to hang out with a cool person.
Okay, tell you what. If you go to our website, www.spiritindiana, one word, spiritindiana.com, and that's a starting link. That will take you, if you go to our social media page, you'll find our Instagram and our Facebook. My social media manager, Mia Kerr, handles those. If you need to ask me a question, she'll get it to me. She monitors and does the posts. We post each week, and we try to get something on there. We do have a podcast, Ghost to Ghost. And it's a dedication. The name is dedicated to the Art Bell Coast to Coast. I mean, God, I still, just like the X-Files, I love to listen to Art Bell and go back and listen to the old shows. Got several of these books. He'll be long missed by this community. That is on all the major streaming formats, and it comes out the 15th and 30th of every month. We have some wonderful things. Last year, we did a lot of the locations in Indiana. The Green Lawn Cemetery, that's a true poltergeist story. They moved the headstones and not the bodies. Look that one up. University Heights Hospital. We always do a special Christmas one and a special Veterans one for Veterans Day. The Christmas this year was The Shepherds, written by Forsyth, who wrote the Odessa Files. It's a great one. You can actually catch the movie of it on Disney Plus, but that was the episode for the 15th of December. Take a look at our podcast. We would love to have you do that. We also do a master class. Now, this is a 12-hour to 14-hour class. Depending on the location, depends on the price. You pay for the price. You pay the price to get into class. The class is 3/4 of it is classroom, and then it ends with a live investigation. You get to use equipment. There are 2 courses there. All this is on our website, and you can reach us there. If you would like, you can email us at info at spiritindiana.com. And, we would love to hear from you. Our Facebook page, if you reach out, you post a question, and certainly post them for the upcoming broadcast. And certainly, as we were talking earlier, we hope to go on video. We do have a hotline number. It isn't for casual conversation generally. If you do live in Indiana, I do a lecture circuit. I do go to some paracons and lecture. We do all kinds of things. I lecture on locations in Indiana. I also lecture on Christmas ghosts and other denizens, including Krampus. And we actually have a wonderful Krampus that comes in from one of the groups during that lecture. And then we do one on Irish ghosts. And me being Scottish, I'm in full kilt, and I come out for that one. So you can take a look. Our website has all that information. And we would certainly love to have anybody and everybody to come out and visit us. And I'll tell you what, Terry, I can't thank you enough for having me on the show. It's been a great conversation.
Sure,
Really
no problem.
this.
We really need to sit down and discuss more because
Yeah.
as you talk, so many things just pop in my head. The minute you say something, there's another question. You
Yeah.
say something else, there's
It
another
seems that
question.
each item brings up another trigger, and I mean, it's after you've had this much years, it come. I want to leave you with two quick stories, if you'll contend with me. Um,
Sure.
the hotline. Everybody always asks me, how do we man that? And I said, well, we get some funny stories out of that. Two calls I got, which I always tell these as a joke, and of course we get lots of serious calls and cases, but every once in a while you get one of those that stand out. And one night had a young lady call me, and usually it's always late at night. You always kind of go, oh shit, when one of those call about 11 o'clock on, because you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes, I'd say 70% of the chance they're parapsychology related. The other half, God knows what you'll get. So anyway, lady calls me and says, well, here's my situation. I had this UFO come over and drop off some ghosts. And that particular night, I was trying to get some sleep because I had to be up at like 5 a.m. And I looked at my watch. It's 11:30. I thought, hell, I got to do something here. So I hate to do it, but I said, well, let me tell you what. I said, since the UFOs dropped the ghosts off, I said, you should probably start with the UFOs. I said, let me give you iMUFON's number. They're our local UFO group, and they'll start you out. She goes, that's who gave me your number. I thought, those bastards. And, the other story, I had a guy call me. It was about that middle of the day. And he was a nice kind of country boy. I mean, kind of, down home kind of boy. And he called me up and he says, hey, he says, I'm thinking about hunting Bigfoot. I said, really? He says, yes. He says, what can you help me out with? I said, well, we don't do any cryptozoology. I'm sorry. I said, I can hook you up with the BFRO out of Bloomington, Indiana. That's where they're stationed. He goes, okay. So where do I buy the tags? I'm thinking, tags? What tags? And it did dawn on me. He's looking for hunting tags to hunt the thing with guns. And I go, oh, well, let me give you DNR's number. I'm sure there's rangers there that have my name engraved on a board somewhere and hate me to no end. But yeah, we gave him his number and sent him on the way. I mean, when you run it, you're going to get a few people that may not be easiest to deal with.
Right.
But hey, anytime you want me on, if I can do it, I'll be there. We'll gladly have. I was really hoping we got some questions from your crowd tonight or some of your listeners. So.
Sunday. Hey, I'll be honest. Sundays are pretty slow.
Are they okay?
Yeah. Sundays are unusually slow. The best time that I get a lot of comments are either
Yes.
on Fridays or Saturdays.
Well, maybe we can do one of those, and maybe I can get some more people on. That would help.
But the thing is, on my podcast, a lot of these people here are from overseas, so they're probably asleep right now. So what happens is, when they wake up and they see what NSPS TV Paranormal Podcast had a podcast, they'll go back and they'll hit, they'll go and they'll look at it. And someone will leave me a comment,
Sure.
and this and that. But yeah, I
we
mean,
have some
it's
viewers from Britain. Cool. I have friends there in the lodge, and we go over when we can. I haven't been over in quite a few years, about 6 or 8 years. But upcoming, being Scottish, we have St. Andrew's Day this month, and we bring in haggis for that. My wife cooks Scottish meal, and we have a St. Andrew. Well, it's actually a Burns supper. It's dedicated to Robbie Burns, who is the Scottish son, the poet. Who, if you've ever got any of the Hallmark greeting cards, if it's poetic, he probably wrote it. Roses are red, violets are blue. That's all Robbie Burns. And so we do a Burns supper, and then we go to one at the Scottish Rite Cathedral where they pipe in the haggis and so forth. And I play bagpipes. I've had some problems with some respiratory health issues. I'm trying to get back on the pipes, but certainly, yeah. I mean, a lot of the guys from England, I don't get their comments till the next day. A lot of the brothers I know over there because they're asleep. So, but I tell you what, maybe next time we can do this on a Friday or Saturday. If I get my people in here, I can have my social media manager running our Facebook page and getting questions over from there as well. Maybe we can do some sort of double hitter that way. So
that'd be cool.
Yeah. Thank you again. Right. Thank you for getting a chance to plug our group and our show. And
no problem, Gary, my friend. No problem. Man, guys, if you guys are listening on the platform, please go over to Spirit Indiana, man, look this guy up. Let's support. You know how I do it. It's all about support. Let's get these numbers up. You got any questions, or if you ever in Indiana, and if you, like I said, you need somebody to
Reach
hang
out.
out with, just reach out and just say hello. And I'm pretty sure he would answer the phone for you,
I will.
or the email. But in the meantime, Chief Lawson, I appreciate it, man. Great conversation. But duty calls and I gotta go.
Take care.
You
Thank you.
know? But hey, this is Terry with NSPS TV Paranormal Podcast. You're in the Lion's Den tonight, and I will see you guys next week. Same time, same station, same platforms. Peace. All right, Chief. Have a good one, brother.
You too. Take care. It's now time for the ghost story of the day with Eric Kerr.
Today's ghost story comes from Haunted Indiana, Ghosts and Strange Phenomena of the Hoosier State by James A. Willis. And today we're heading to West Indiana. This one is called Never Borrow One of James Whitcomb's Books Without Asking. I'm a book lover, and as such, I've amassed an enormous personal library. In fact, my paranormal library alone is bulging with well over 900 volumes. When it comes to my books, while I encourage everyone to borrow and enjoy them, it annoys me to no end when I find that one of my prized volumes is walked off, or someone has simply neglected to tell me that they borrowed one. That's why, when I came across the ghost story concerning the Whitcomb collection at the DePaul University Library, I couldn't help but smile. When he was alive, Indiana Governor James Whitcomb was known far and wide for being a bibliophile. In fact, while he was alive, Whitcomb took great pride in acquiring some extremely rare volumes to add to his personal library. When he passed away in 1852, Whitcomb had made a special request in his will to ensure that his library remained intact to be enjoyed for years to come. He willed it to the Indiana Asbury University. The university gladly accepted the donation, and a short time later, the Whitcomb collection took up residence among the library stacks. Shortly after that, some say that Whitcomb's ghost moved into the library. His ghost was sometimes reported near the Whitcomb collection, as if he was keeping an eye on the books. In 1884, the university changed its name to DePaul University after businessman Washington C. DePaul, who had been making huge contributions to the university for the previous decade. But nothing changed for the Whitcomb collection. Whitcomb's ghost was still reported lurking in the library, keeping an eye on his prized books. That is, until one day, when a student borrowed, some say stole, a rare copy of James McPherson's The Poems of Ossian. The day after the student removed the McPherson book from the library, the badly shaken boy returned it. In a trembling voice, he stated the previous evening, after retiring for the night, he awoke to find the ghost of James Whitcomb standing in his room. After remaining there in silence for what seemed like an eternity, Whitcomb's ghost suddenly began crying out, "Ossian! Who stole the Ossian?" before simply vanishing. The library staff wasn't entirely convinced of the boy's story. Still, they decided that the entire Whitcomb collection needed to be placed under lock and key. This is how it resides to this day, making it virtually impossible for anyone to make off with the book. But that apparently hasn't stopped the ghost of James Whitcomb from making an appearance in the library every once in a while, just to keep an eye on things and make sure all his books are safe and sound.
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air, or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd., all rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.